All righty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving online information entrepreneurs throughout the US and around the world. Welcome to today's conversation on guts, grit, and great business. I am so excited to welcome you to this particular conversation because we have not yet covered this topic on the podcast. And I was joking, I was talking with one of my favorite podcast friends the other day because we actually did a round two, had him back on the podcast for a conversation. And he was laughing. He's like, "You've been going at this a while. Like, how old is your podcast?" And COVID brain, I'm like, was it 2 months ago or 49 years ago? I can't remember. Right? And he goes,
Right.
once we finally figured out the date, he goes, "Oh, you had a COVID baby and it was a podcast." And it was right at the start of COVID. But what I realized is my podcast is almost 3 years old. And by the time this
Wow.
comes out, it could be 3 years old. So
Well,
there you go. We
congratulations.
have not yet in 3 years, I'm actually a little embarrassed to admit, talked about HR. So for those of you listening, you're in for a treat. Welcome to both Josie Ross and Ron Ross.
Thank
Hi,
you so
Heather.
much. Hey, Heather, how's it going?
It's so good to see you guys. And I also want to say I'm also super excited about this conversation because this is the first time it's been a panel. I mean, multiple person panel. So 3 folks it'll make just for a super fun, I think very well-rounded conversation because I know you guys share some of the same expertise and have different expertise as well.
Absolutely.
We do.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know Josie and Ron, Josie Ross is a thoughtful and engaging speaker who has a knack for bringing fresh insights to conversations. She has served as a fractional head of HR for several startups in the healthcare space, helping these businesses successfully to scale up their HR and people operation to meet the needs of their clients, investors, and employees. Josie is passionate about helping businesses succeed, especially social impact business owners and entrepreneurs. Hello, we're talking to you, listeners. Josie brings her 15 years of successful business operations and leadership to her coaching and consulting engagements. She has led several high-performing teams to record sales, consistently the top performer, where she grew her division to 60 million in annual sales from scratch. As a co-founder and partner at Avant HR Solutions, she gets to apply her operations lens, scientific mind, and passion for organization and talent development to help other businesses to achieve success by scaling up their HR and people operations. Love it, Josie. Those are some good accomplishments in there, right? Ron, thank
Heather.
you. I know
Hey,
you're not watching.
I married and partner well, so
Good
that's
job.
why I'm glad you read hers first because it's like,
We don't need to say anything for Ron. I know.
I'll be like, he's smart. He
amazing.
married
He's
her.
smart.
That's
He married Josie. Welcome, Ron. I'm kidding. For those of you that don't know Ron is a dynamic speaker, facilitator, and consultant that specializes in creating happy, harmonious, and high-performing teams. Ron is an expert on building successful culture and group dynamics. He is an accomplished writer. We were just talking about their book coming out shortly, recently completing his second book. And this has a new name. Ron, remind me what the name is.
Inspire me.
Inspire Me, where organizations win the talent battle, beat the competition, and bolster employee engagement. Ron is passionate about helping businesses succeed, especially social impact businesses, business owners, and entrepreneurs. As co-founder of Avant HR Solutions with his partner Josie, he gets to create a rich laboratory. I love the scientific words in here. It's so great. I'm such a fan of science. He gets to create, yes, I bet, a laboratory to tinker and to help clients solve their most juicy organizational challenges. With an inventive spirit and knack for working with people, it's no surprise Ron's career trajectory led him to consulting. Prior to his career as a consultant and executive coach, Ron served as head of learning for a national leader in the home healthcare industry. He has served as a consultant for healthcare, pharmaceutical, and biotech firms based throughout the United States. Those are quite the intros, you guys. I love it. You come with such great and broad experience.
Thank
I
you
didn't
for
do too
that.
bad either, right?
No.
And he's kind of cute. So
I know. Win, win, win all around. I
all
love
the way
it.
around.
I love it.
Yeah.
And it's Friday, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Yay.
Goodness.
So good. So, I mean, I, as an attorney, see a lot of issues come up in the HR space, right? Which is partly why I was so excited to be connected with you. I think our mutual friend, Paul Zelizer, got us connected, right? And if you're listening,
Paul.
you need to go jump over not only to Paul's podcast, which I'm sure you guys are on, but also we recently recorded his second episode on my podcast. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, Paul's amazing.
Mhm.
Anyways, the first thing I think I would just love to start with to get kind of people's feet underneath them around the HR conversation is, what you typically see businesses, and they could be small businesses. I know you guys probably work with a variety of, organizations from a size standpoint, but let's start with small businesses. What kind of mistakes do you catch them making?
This is like
We're
the
jumping
closed
right
door
in. I
conversation we
know.
are.
I want
Yeah.
people to like get it in a hurry why
Behind the
they should
curtain.
stick around for this conversation. Yeah.
I love the question. Yeah, we work with several different sizes. So from the 1 to 2 ownership size to the $1 billion organization. And what we see in HR, the biggest mistake is, oh no, we didn't know that was an issue. So it's sort of like they call us after there's an issue. It's we didn't know that was a rule and regulation. We haven't been following it, and now we need to. The other thing we see a lot of is we didn't set up the system. We didn't set up a compensation system and a policy. We didn't set up the guidelines to do this thing. And we allowed this employee to do this thing and this employee to do this thing and this employee to do this thing. And now we're in trouble for it. So we see some of that as well as part of mistakes. But Ron, I'm curious to see
I would
you
say, in addition to that, is like people don't give any feedback, coaching, correction, and then they want to fire someone. And even though, a lot of states are at will, it doesn't mean you get to do what you want when you want. There's still repercussions. So it's just smarter to invest in people, even if they don't work out, rather than hold it, get frustrated. Now just, I'm done with you. So we see that a lot in organizations of all sizes.
Oh my gosh. Well, and all of those points, yes, yes, yes. I feel like we're speaking the same language because I live in the legal space and I see the same thing. Oops, I didn't even know I was supposed to look at that, or I didn't know that was a thing, or I didn't think I would have to address it until there's a problem, right? And they just didn't expect it quite so soon. Ron, to your point, actually what you talk about and the discomfort that people feel in facing difficult conversations.
Oh my God.
One of the reasons I have a whole like framework, 5-bucket system. And guess what my last bucket is? Dispute resolution strategies, which you could also just call communication strategies, right? And it's just human nature. And I think particularly in the workplace, there's all of this added pressure that comes along with having tough conversations. I think partly because some people, whether they're leading a business or even just in upper levels of management inside somebody else's organization, just don't know what they don't know, and they feel uncomfortable knowing how to navigate having a difficult conversation, right? And part of that might be like regulatory or rules related where they just need a little education, but some of it is like relationship basics as well.
It truly is. I mean, a lot of it comes down to, we bring sort of our first team into our workforce, and a lot of us haven't examined it. And if you come from a household where conflict was, you don't talk about it, you avoid it, we're just quiet about it, or you're a combative, we just don't re-examine and what it needs to be. And then things are changing. And particularly in this like era in time where there is social change, the workforce is more diverse, there's more pressure on companies. There are a lot of leaders, and Josie deals with this probably more than me, that want to do the right thing and want to address things, but they are terrified. So from the hotbed issues to just simple, you just haven't been doing your job, folks. They're missing it. So that's the thing that we see the most, is folks just aren't jumping into those conversations soon enough and documenting it. Josie will talk about that part. So,
and do you think the reason why, I mean, obviously we all have a certain amount of trepidation around conflict. I would say that's pretty normal just from a human nature survival standpoint. I know some people are wired a little differently if they grew up in a super combative environment where that was just how people operated. Maybe they're more okay with just being out and about with stuff. But I think by and large, most people, that's not their comfort zone, right? In my experience, even having what I would call a clarifying conversation with clients, with business partners, with whoever, can be a super big challenge, right? And so certainly having an employment related, performance related conversation, I think even ups the ante a little more. What else? Do you see anything else feeding into that?
Just I'll let you go first, because if not, I'll be just talking away. So you go first.
I think one of the things I see is the discomfort around. So I'm going to get real here for a second.
Right. It's Friday, folks. It's Friday. Hang in there for the ride. We've been through a week.
Friday, been a long week. A lot of the companies we deal with have a certain demographic at the top, and then different demographics at the bottom. And I'm not going to veil it. I mean, we have white men who lead organizations who are now like, how do I talk to my female employees? How do I talk to the Black employee who reports to me, or the person of color who reports to me? And there's discomfort around this because they're not really sure how to engage. They don't want to say the wrong thing, so they end up saying nothing. And that's also not okay. And we run into a lot of that sort of comes up against these difficult conversations as well, when certain different demographics are coming together to have conflictual conversations or sort of uncomfortable conversations. Totally. And the other thing is, employees don't know what to say. Leaders don't know what to say to their employees. There are rules and regulations. They're not sure what to follow. They're not sure, can I say this? Can I
just gonna put my head in the sand over here and ignore it?
Yes. And there's a lot of ignoring that goes on until it's at the breaking point where the tension has gotten so big that they have to do a firing. And it's like, we just moved to fire. We didn't have any conversations. We just fire, terminate the person. And it's like, whoa.
And then they call everybody.
Us. We're like, help.
Or worse yet, they quit and they flame you on Glassdoor, and because you just didn't check in and have a conversation. So I think if I had to put a headline on what Josie's talking about, it's the anxiety and the emotional element of having those conversations. So we kind of talk about this from a perspective with clients. It's like you have to see yourself as an athlete, and athletes and performers, they have to get in touch with their performance state. And when you're about to have a crucial conversation, that's a performance. It's the heart rate is racing, you're nervous, and it's okay. You have professional golfers, and they've had the whoop things on their wrist. When they're on the first tee, their heart rate is up. But the difference between them and most of the folks we're talking about is they haven't really gotten familiar with it. They haven't put themselves in that position, and they haven't really made themselves okay with, okay, what is that I'm feeling, and what are some strategies to mitigate that? So that's a big part of I think what makes people comfortable. It's not only just the content, but also dealing with the emotions and the anxiety of it as well.
And would you say that underlying so much of that is just a lack of training from the company perspective?
Yeah. It is. It's one of those things that it's not, no one's born with the skill to do it. And we just don't teach it, right? Families aren't taught. And then we just go along with these subpar skills and how to really have conversations. And Josie and I, we love to watch reality TV. And when we're watching reality TV, because we're consultants who deal with human nature, we pause a lot and say, how do you think they dealt with that? They weren't really honest. That was just an expectation without an agreement. So
Start
we talk
labeling
about
it.
all of these skill sets that you need to have, and they're so learnable. But leaders, business owners have to invest in those skills, because if they don't, they're going to have leaders leading teams that are just trashing their reputation inadvertently.
I think part of the issue over the last 3 years too, because it's been compounded by the fact that people are remote, that organizations are in reactive states because they're responding constantly to the changing environment. They don't have the time and resources right now because they're in reactive state. They're pinched for everything. And so they're not putting the sort of time and resources into teaching their leaders this. I think prior to the pandemic, prior to 2020, there was an effort around putting resources towards different leadership development. And then the pandemic happened. It's like, let's put everything on the hold that isn't survival mode. I think we're still sort of in that in between. Organizations, small, it doesn't matter what size you are, you're still sort of responding to what has happened to us over the last 3 years. And to be honest, it's compounded our emotional feelings. So we're showing up at work more exhausted, more burnt out as a result of all of that. And so what we see in our consulting business, Ron and I, is more reactive responses to people, to things, to processes, because we're all sort of operating from this reactive state as a result of the last 3 years.
Yeah,
and just to add, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You first.
No.
I would say, to add on what Josie's saying, and then you have people who you're not doing it face to face like it used to be. And so we've had to learn how to get in and like try to do some of the like smoothing and what you call those relationship skills. And I think Zoom has just cut out a lot of that. So, kudos to you. One of the things you did to make us feel comfortable is you had a little bit of a warm-up part of the conversation. I think leaders forget the basic stuff that they need to do. It's like, there's nothing wrong with taking 4 or 5 minutes to check in with the person. How are you? Like, hey, I'm not doing great. I need to kind of like settle myself down before we get into the business. So we've lost some of that basic etiquette because of virtual. So folks have to establish new rules and new ways of dealing with it on top of all what Josie said. So the workplace and the rules are changing, and they're changing fast, for sure.
Well, it really is true. The number of people that I've spoken with who even now, right, quote unquote, post-pandemic, if you can call it that, who are still working on like healing their nervous system, right? And you throw the work stress, and if you're parents like I am to young kids, life felt crazy for a while. I was joking with you guys about launching this podcast within a couple months of the pandemic starting and having 2 kids home full time and doing that on top of work. And right, it was just, I think part of the gift for me in that long, horrible experiment is that I got a daily reminder of, first of all, the importance of not only checking in with others, but checking in with yourself. Like, how am I doing today? There were some days where I was just so exhausted, I couldn't even work, and being able to recognize like other people might be having the same experience. And, you're right. Zoom, I'm a people person. I love people. I love being in real life with people because that energy exchange is just so fun and real, and you really get a sense of people. And, Zoom is okay. I still love it. I get to see faces and generally feel energy, but it is different. And I think, for companies that were forced to pivot, like I know a guy who had built his career around and really was doing quite well around how to host and handle live in-person events, right? And he'd kind of like reached this pinnacle right before COVID, completely had to pivot, and now he's out with a book on exactly this point that you talked about, which is how to use Zoom but create connection and like really amplify the experience of Zoom And I think that still continues to be a challenge for certain businesses, not only in their internal processes, but in their external processes if they're doing, Zoom events or things via Zoom to connect with clients or groups. But there's a lot that has changed. And I think collectively, giving people a little grace serves us all. One of the other things that I wonder about, because I serve primarily small businesses, right? It's a little bit this whole access to support issue, whether in my world it's access to legal justice, whether it's, anything else. How do the smaller companies get HR support that fits for them, right? And where do they look? Like, I know that a lot of people can be hard to make a decision around certain support services with a great deal of confidence, especially if they don't directly know somebody or know the service provider, right? So talk to us a little bit about the challenge you see small businesses facing and getting connected to the right resources for their business obviously in the HR world.
Josie, I'm going to turn it over to you, my dear.
Yeah.
So I'm sweet talking her now.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. No
on
problem.
a Friday at
Yeah,
5.
that's right.
Yeah, we recognize that different budgets mean that different resources, not even budgets, but different resources, period, mean different access for different services. And I think in HR specifically, you're dealing with the people you work with. It's a very personal sort of touch. It's a people thing, right? It's not like we're asking someone for transactional work. It involves the people who work for us. So one of the things we suggest, if you're having trouble, or if you just want to figure out like what's the right kind of HR support for my organization or for my business, there are several levels of support. There are consultants like Ron and I who we do retainers. So you get so many hours of business and, we'll help you in the transactional sort of day-to-day, whatever crisis appears. There are hiring people. So if the right support for you is hiring people, you may want to hire someone to do it or hire a full-time consultant to do it. I think the more complex, my advice always is, the more complex your business is, the sooner you want to get HR involved. Complexity causes HR issues, period. So if you have a lot of customers, if your business is very, we do a lot of healthcare and small startup healthcare, which is a very complex business. It requires licensed professionals and clients who need really very regulated care. So if you're even in a small business that requires those sorts of levels of regulation, we suggest just talk to one expert, just an hour of time to sort of get, okay, what do I need to start with? Because the experts are there to help.
Well, and I think that's often, it's interesting because it sounds so simple, like just get started having the conversations and looking, but it's like, I know with legal, people are worried like they're going to open Pandora's box, right? Do you get that same sense around HR? Yeah.
Yes.
Nodding heads for anybody not watching. It's like,
yes, they come to us for this problem, and we recognize, it's actually a symptom of this larger thing that needs to be addressed. But what I know is that being proactive about things like legal, this, being proactive about things like legal support and HR support actually saves you money in the long run, because the consequences of not can be very, very costly.
Oh, tremendously. And, and I tell people regularly the irony of like the small business experience is that like it takes employees to grow, right? It takes team to grow because you just cannot do it all yourself. And from a legal perspective, hiring that team is the riskiest thing you can do in your business, like full stop.
Yes.
Right. And so it requires those systems. It requires that structure to be able to do that and grow, even with your first team member or two, the right way. And so often I'll get people like, oh, well, I want to test out this independent contractor. And then in a while we can examine whether or not they become an employee. And it's like, okay, let's talk about this because it sounds like you're making assumptions. Oh, hi, doggy. We have a doggy at our house. No worries. We're dog friendly around here. And sometimes I have to stop them there. Like, we need to look at what state you're located in, especially because so many of my clients have interstate businesses, right? And we were talking about employees based all around, etc. You may not have the option to call somebody an independent contractor depending on what they're doing, how much they're working, right? What the rules are in that particular state. And so we have to back you up and go back to square one, where I'm like, nope, we need to get you connected with an employment attorney in that state.
And states are so specific.
Yes.
I mean, it's different. And keeping up with what are the regulations across all 50 states is complicated.
It is complicated. This is one of the early questions I asked Ron on our connecting call. It was like, is that a challenge in the HR world to stay abreast of all of that stuff?
Yeah, we were talking about that before. We're like, yeah, I probably should have filled out that questionnaire. I think that's a top challenge for us. Just like, you should have.
I said to him, does Heather do research across all 50 states? Because I could really use some legal research across all 50 states. They're so different. And it comes at you so quickly, the regulations. So we're keyed into like multiple alerts on my computer every day about the regulations coming in from this state and that state and this state and that state, and they're all changing.
Totally. Well, and that's what I wondered, whether there's some like professional services organization or something that you belong to that helps you monitor that stuff. And folks that are listening, I want you to pay attention to the fact that we have experts in their field who are talking about the intensity of keeping up with regulations. Like, how could you possibly do this on your own as a small business? Like, just stop it.
Well said.
Just
We'll stop,
get into
right?
the doctor already. I know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a full-time job. And, you know, we're connected to like, SHRM is great, a great resource for all of that. But every state has its own website and will send out alerts. Like every labor law, state labor law will send out its own alerts to give you regulations, but literally it's 50 of them.
Well, that's right. And even you look at just comparing, you know, like I'm obviously West Coast, based in Washington, just going down the coast, Oregon, California, right? You get to California and it's like, okay, you have completely different rules for certain things in California. So even quote unquote implementing a standard independent contractor agreement for a true independent contractor, like there are some big no-nos that you do not want to cross the line on or get wrong if you're dealing in California. And you know, people, it's like, you know, to some extent business is a process of developing, I call it the winging it skills, but around core foundational things, I feel like, you know, small businesses can get overly focused on, I'll call it the outside of their business. And it's not until they're really facing some turmoil that they catch up on building out some of the foundational stuff like what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And I'll give Josie credit, you know, even though she was humble, it's hard. She knows the foundation, and you as a lawyer, that's what helps. If you know the foundation and then now you're looking at a regulation that's changed in another state, you can quickly interpret it. So it's not even just finding the information, it's being able to understand what it means and to compare it to sort of what the baseline is. So to your point, it's better to consult, to have sort of in your, I'm gonna age myself, your Rolodex.
No, you did not. No. Listen, that's one of my favorite phrases. I think
I just had to say it because it was funny.
Right? I always say, put me in your Rolodex. Like I want, you know, to be a business card on your desk and not a book on the book of faces, whatever. Like a real person. Right. Yes.
Yeah. You got to have somebody sort of your phone an expert and your email text an expert, and just somebody who can point you in the right direction. I love that, you know, one of the things that I learned about you from the first time that we talked is you're very network connection oriented. So if you don't know a super connector, or if you're not a super connector, connect with a super connector, because chances are they're going to have someone in their network that mean, maybe a friend of a friend or a colleague of a colleague. That would be sort of just my practical advice as well.
Yeah. Oh, it really is such a good piece, because I do find that, and like even the number of times I get questions around like, do you know anybody to talk to about insurance for my particular business? I think it's really easy for certain people to feel like an island in regards to certain resources. And so the other piece of advice I have for folks is also, if you can't find a resource, directly, reach out to businesses that you are connected with that are in the same industry, same field, kind of same trajectory. Find out who they're working with. Find out
Absolutely.
like who they're working with and love, by the way. Sometimes,
Absolutely.
people end up working with a service provider and it's just like to get by. Don't do that. Find ones that come really highly recommended from another business on your same trajectory and maybe a step or two ahead of you, right, on that path. So that's a really great point. I would love, and we should have started here, but I wanted to get right into like some of the issues that we see, right? I would love to dig in a little bit to your backgrounds and what led you into the field of HR, right? Which is really people problem heavy. I'm just going to say it. And not everybody is attracted to those kinds of problems.
Yeah. Josie, we agreed you would go first.
A
This is
margarita is waiting for you at the
Yeah,
end
it
of
is.
Right?
It is. It is. It
Uh,
is. It is.
Origin story. I love these. I love a
Mm.
story anyway. Let's see if
You
I can
do.
spin this into a story. I always say our path sort of finds us. I did not wake up as an 8-year-old and say, boy, I hope I go into HR. I mean,
Surprise.
right? I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. I wanted to be a
There's
doctor,
the science. Ding, ding,
right?
ding.
Ding, ding,
Yep.
ding, comes full circle. I have a systems thinking brain. I think about ecosystems. I think about body systems. I think about chemical systems. It's just how my brain works. So I wanted to be a doctor, and sort of found my way after getting my bachelor's degree. There's always the weird in between. You're taking your MCAT. You're trying to figure out what you want to do next. I was actually a CNA. I put myself through college as a CNA at a state-run nursing home. Hardest job. If we have CNAs out there or people who employ CNAs, hardest job.
Right. Yeah.
And so did that through college, but decided I was going to take a little bit of a break, to gain money and to figure out what I wanted to do next after my bachelor's degree, and found my way into healthcare administration. I started in home care, scheduling for sick children, sick and disabled children, scheduling nurses in their home. Cried every day for the first 2 weeks because I could not keep straight the nurses from the clients. It was such a high pressure job. Parents calling saying, "Where is my nurse?" Very high pressure job. But then spent 12 years in that business and built a business of $60 million in pediatric home healthcare. Loved it.
Wow.
Gained this real respect for the people who do this work. It is very hard work. It's emotionally hard work, physically hard work. They give their whole hearts to it to support these children. Just really both very stressful, but very heartwarming work. And I decided at the end of 12 years, after I had built like this huge business, had several locations across the state of Pennsylvania, had decided I needed change. I needed, I think as entrepreneurs, and I think probably your audience can relate to this, we get to this point where we've been working for somebody else for a while and we're like, okay, what's next? We sort of climb a mountain and we look around and say, okay, what is the next mountain to climb? And so I thought about the business. I thought about what I had done so far. And I'm like, people, this is the most complicated piece of the business, right? It's the lever that is the hardest to move. It's the most complex. No one person is like the other person. They don't respond in the same way. They're not widgets we move on a board.
Dang it.
Dang it. Right. Super complex. And I loved the idea of how do we create, this is back to my scientist mind, systems that support them in doing the work that they do. Healthcare has always been a passion of mine. And so I moved into HR, went to my master's, moved into HR. Did VP of HR for a large home healthcare agency for a while. Met Ron, and I think he's going to tell his story, but our combined story is we met each other through work and realized we had come at it very, very differently. I had the operations mind and the very HR. He has the very people leadership development. But ours is really a love story, a passion about what we do. We combined it with the passion we have for each other. And we're like, can we make a business out of this?
I love
And
it.
during the pandemic, we were like, let's start. I know this is the craziest thing. I don't know what compelled us, but the world was in crisis. And we were like, things are about to shift majorly in this field that we love so much, taking care of people at work. It's going to be so different when we come out the other side of this. And how do we capitalize on that? And how do we use the skills the both of us have to create a business that really helps people during this crazy time we find ourselves in? So we took the leap and decided to open the business. And we combined my HR and operations experience with his leadership development and sort of instructional design and teaching experience, and decided, how do we make the world a better place coming out of this major crisis we find ourselves in?
That's amazing. Yeah, it takes a lot, I think, to have the willingness to tackle what I see as well as the biggest challenges in business, the people problems that come up, right? And not everybody has the, I'll just call it patience or fortitude to jump into that arena, right? And I love this combination of your skill sets, the systems, operation thinking, as well as the really people-centric, team building leadership stuff. So Ron, talk to us a little bit about where you come from and where your experience comes from.
Yeah, I mean, mine boils down to, I've always been like curious about people. I'm a middle child, 3 boys. So I come with all Jan Brady issues, Marsha. And I just couldn't figure out. I'm like, how can people in the same family have different experiences? My brother first made the mistakes. My parents figured out, okay, we're not going to do that with you. And I joke with my parents now, you stopped being parents with my younger brother.
Oh, totally.
It's just like, you didn't care anymore. So I was just always curious about the people dynamic. Also, I was a tinkerer. I just love to try to take things apart, figure them out. Most of the time I couldn't put them back together. Very imaginative. So I thought, if I could like think it up, I could figure it out. And perfect example, I was for some reason I wanted a pinball machine, and because my cousin Danny had one, and I'm like, I put the wish list into my parents. My parents couldn't afford that. So I put it in anyway. And to kind of just placate myself, I'm like, I'm a believer in having what you want now. I built my own cardboard like pinball machine. I have a shoe box and different stuff. And I think my parents felt sorry for me, or just were moved by like, this kid is like, we got to just try to make this happen. Long story short, they end up getting it for us. They still have it in their home.
That's
so now like all of the
awesome.
grandkids have used it, and it started from like the power of like suggestion and imagination and just having really good parents. So I thought like, all right, I want to be an inventor. I want to create something in the world. And that was translated and from my parents and some mentors to engineering. So from high school to early college, my science background was engineering, physics, computer science. While I had an aptitude for it, I had no passion. I couldn't imagine myself being in a lab or being sort of stuck behind a computer, although I spend a lot of time behind a computer these days. My fixation was really about people. So I pivoted, started my early career in sales, like talking to clients, didn't like the hardcore pressure. After a couple of years, I'm like, what do I love? I love like presenting to people. I love connecting with them, and I also love technology. So I was able to pivot and really start when like we were trying to figure out back in the 90s, how do we have people use technology and equipment and still do their jobs well? So I was helping folks to learn how to do that, teaching, found out I had a really great aptitude for it, and I continued to level up. All right, let me teach you how now to service, connect. Let me teach you how to manage, lead, and let me teach you how to coach. So it's been a love and passion for the last 22 years. Like, I always knew that eventually I would work for myself. And it was about 7 years ago, maybe 8 now. I was a happy solopreneur and doing work that I love. And I didn't need a huge client base. So
Mhm.
when Josie and I met, and she said it right, it's just love for the work, love for just this belief in sort of like the innate possibility of people. And I think that's what drives us. It's like we believe in sort of like the world should evolve and continue to grow. Let's not go backwards. We believe that in inclusion, we believe in possibilities. And we kind of fell in love like with our minds first. And then when, I was still doing my thing outside, she was working, doing brilliantly, her career inside. It's like, this is a great opportunity, as she said, to really, really scale up. So to be quite honest, like, we've had a really good first year and a half, but we're still trying to figure out, like, it's what we are, what we think we are, and maybe sort of what we could be. And we're still trying to figure it out, but we're loving the work, love what we do. And it's almost like we have these two different operations, sort of this HR that really helps people out. And then we have leadership, coaching, and then we have some, interrelated skills. So it's been sort of a beautiful journey, so far for us.
I love that. And I think I already know the answer to this. You might have just said it. But what do you perceive as your difference in the marketplace when you look around and compare yourself to other HR service providers?
Yeah, I'll say first. One of the lines is that we're not your grandfather's HR service.
That's what we always say.
I think we are,
Mm.
because we both come from like science backgrounds and even sort of the master's degree. It was science based, so like there should be evidence based practices to play, but it can't be in a classroom and it can't be in academia. It has to be road tested. It has to move at the speed of business. And I think the way we are is we partner with our clients, and if you're willing to try and figure it out, we're willing to do that with you. And some of our clients are our long-term clients who, when we want to like try something that like, hey, here's what the research is showing, they're like, yeah, let's go for it. And it's great to have like clients that trust you that way, and you have built those long-term relationships with. So that's just my perspective. Josie may say a little bit different.
No, I agree. I think the other thing that sets us apart is we have operations experience. I think what we find a lot in human resources is they're solely human resources. There's nothing wrong with having a strict human
You
resources.
frown when you said it.
Did I though?
Yeah.
There it really isn't. I think there's nothing wrong with having solely a traditional HR trajectory, having just solely HR experts on your consulting team for other firms. But what sets us apart is we run businesses. We run businesses of all sizes. We run teams of all sizes. We understand profit and loss. So a lot of the advice we give is through the lens of operations and not through a strict lens of HR. So we tend to be comfortable in the gray as a result of that. Traditional HR is very black and white, very like rules driven.
Here's the rules. Yes. Here's your pamphlet. Here's your whatever.
Yes.
But yes, I love the combination of the operation side and the leadership training, right? The education that goes along with it. Because I think in a lot of professional services, the education piece can be severed from the actual delivery of the service or the documentation or whatever. And so a transformation doesn't really happen on the client side. It's kind of like they feel like they plugged in a piece of the puzzle, but they didn't really transform from a leadership perspective, right?
Well said. Well said. And I would say the other thing that makes us unique is we're just different. While we have an attraction and affinity for each other, our brains think differently. Just the way we process information, sort of early experiences. And I think rather than running from it, we've leaned into that, and we've really encouraged our clients to lean into the power of inclusion. And we're not just talking about racial, which is important. We're not just talking about gender, which is important, just even how people think. And the research is clear. Those inclusive teams, those diverse teams, they just outperform. Same thing with small companies. So instead of just being comfortable, I know who I know, and I'm comfortable with this type of person, you'll have so much success. But if you're willing to try to make it work, to be around folks who think different, there's going to be friction. And part of what we talk about is how you smooth that out and how you can set up systems to make it work. I think you outperform in the long run. So I think that's a part of like our value system as well.
I love that so much. I mean, I think a lot of small businesses, even growth-oriented businesses, they want to do it the right way, right? They want to be doing things, as well as possible. And it's just this information gap. It's just not connecting with exactly the right resource. And whether it's a book, whether it's just like a place to get started, like for somebody listening that is like, oh, I really resonated with what Ron just said about, being inclusive. And I love how broadly you defined that. Where would you have somebody start?
Yeah, Josie, any thoughts for you? Because I'm gonna pitch, what we're working on.
Well, which
I
I
want
think
you to.
which I think you should. Yes. I mean, that's part of the point. But I really think the earlier we can catch people in that conversation, even before they've built a team, even before they've hired their first person, right? We're going to have some of those listeners here. What does that look like? How do you do it the right way from the start?
Yeah. Josie, I'm just going to say one of the things that we say is starts with like having a conversation with yourself. So it's not even about a book or an outside resource. It's am I comfortable talking to people who are not like me? So I'll give you an example. I'm of an age now where I have adult children who are professionals. So that's the challenge, but it's a beautiful thing. So we have this reverse mentorship relationship where I am giving them like information from someone who's further down the road. But what I get is like understanding of what that generation needs from a morale perspective, from a motivation perspective. So I was just like picking my daughter's brain. So she was taught, she works for like a huge consulting company. And I'm like, tell me what your boss did. Like, how did that like land? So I think you have to be open and know how comfortable you are having those conversations, multi-generational conversations, conversations with people of different race, conversations with people who grew up in a different country. And if you're not, then that's the start. Why aren't you? And what can you do to make yourself more comfortable? Because the world, and despite what was happening in politics, is not going to stop sort of the world becoming more diverse. That just can't stop. So let's get comfortable having conversations with each other. And the best thing is, if you're curious and open, people will open up and share. You might not walk away from the conversation agreeing, but it just changes the landscape. It just changes sort of how you feel about other people. So that's just my thought. And I feel a little passionate about it, Josie.
I can tell.
You might have to take over for me on this one, because
I know you're equally passionate. I need a breather.
Yeah.
Well, I do love that you even just raised the concept of curiosity, right? Which I feel like is huge in business generally, huge in leadership, huge in team building. Like if you're not curious and you cannot get to the true story of your employee and how they feel about things, how they, approach their work, knowing that you have their back. I mean, it's the difference between somebody showing up to a job and doing the bare minimum to get by versus, I think, really truly performing, right?
Yeah, we often say certainty is like the enemy. It's the opposite of curiosity, right? It's like when you're certain about something, you need to question your certainties, because they're also the things that get you in trouble from an HR perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Often.
Oh, totally. I don't have a huge team, but I have a handful of people that work with me in a variety of capacities. And whenever something goes wrong, it's, from the start, I've tried to establish really open conversations like, hey, I noticed this. Can you tell me about what you saw happening or what the experience? And it is so enlightening, because what I often think of as like, oh, that looks like it went wrong, is a massive learning opportunity, usually to like fix the system, fix a process, fix a communication tool, something like that. But listening and hearing like, oh, here's why I did that, or here's why it went this way. It's like, oh, well, then that makes really obvious sense. There's no reason to be, frustrated or concerned or whatever. But if you don't have the willingness to listen and get curious first, I could imagine there's a lot of breakdown that happens even in very small teams.
Yes.
Yeah. I think you nailed sort of a key issue. I think as a leader, one of the mindsets you have to have is you have to have an open mindset. And you have to have sort of that mindset of curiosity or inquiry that's required. It's one of the entrepreneurs, I believe it was Ford, said, I don't have to know everything. I just need to know who to ask. And I think that's like where it starts. So
I love that. Well, and I love the concept of being like, you know what, we hired team for a reason. Let them help us solve this problem rather than telling them what the fix is, right? What do you think the problem is? Like, I'm noticing this rub happening. How do we fix it? Right. And oftentimes the solution that comes out of that question is like, oh, you just eliminated like 3 steps for me. Great.
Yes.
So
We found a simple solution as a result. Yes. Win.
Yeah.
Totally. No, I love that. Well, I feel like even in just talking about, first of all, your shared love of the topic, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, we need to have a separate conversation about how people in relationship co-run a business.
That's true. We get asked that all the time. That might be
We
sort
do.
of a side hustle for us.
It might be.
We're so curious. We had a client say, this is not related. How does that work for you guys? Are you in the same location? How does that work?
I mean, the fact that you guys are both into like the hardest part of, business problems, which is the people, tells me that you already have possibly way above average skills in that department. So that's probably part of the answer. But I love it. I think it's fabulous. And I think, I can see from even the way you guys answer questions, the shared strengths, but also really different strengths that you bring to the table, which is just so critical in business. I know it's been a hard week, Josie, so maybe this is the wrong time for this question, but I wanted to ask, what is it that you really, really love about your work?
I believe we spend 40 plus hours a week, the majority of our waking life at work. And I believe if we create environments where people can be their biggest and best selves, they will have their biggest and best lives. And that if we can accomplish that for even a handful of people, I feel like my life's mission has been completed. And I happen to use HR as the lever in which to do it, and leadership development. But, and other people use other things, but that is truly my passion, helping people be their biggest and best selves every day without barriers. There's a lot of barriers we deal with. And through the last 3 years, I mean, just getting out of bed feels like a big step for, I'm serious. I don't know how some people are doing it. And you mentioned, Heather, like 2 kids in the background while you're trying to work, trying to run your business and your life simultaneously. The stresses are just, I don't know. I commend us all for just being alive right now.
Yeah,
all collectively celebrate this Friday in March 2023. It's a true story. Well, and I love that answer. I feel very much the same from a small business building perspective of like, how can we create small businesses that thrive so that people can show up and do their best work and not just go to a JOB. And I want to be clear that there's nothing wrong with a JOB, but if we can move people from that column into like a real true enjoyment connection experience to their work, like how much better off will the world be, whether it's leadership, business building, or employees, like all around, it's just better for everyone. So I really resonate with, with the way that you approach your work and what you feel about it. I think it's really, really important. How about you, Ron? I would love to have you answer that question.
Yeah, I'll say similar, and I'll just tell a story. For me, it's like one of the reasons I added coaching to sort of my skill set is like, doing workshops and, doing presentations, delivering information, people shaking their head like that. I got it. I wanted a close encounter with people. And I think sort of coaching is that close encounter. And I think one of the beautiful moments I had was recently, I was in the Philadelphia airport, and I had an opportunity to see my daughter. She was flying out to go to Las Vegas to see some family. And then I had a former coaching client, and she's like, "Hey, I know you're in town." And I'm like, "Well, I'm meeting my daughter, or we can all meet at this place." And then having sort of this multi-generational, different race conversation, and just having someone just talk about the impact that I had on their lives and tell my daughter, because, you see your parents in a certain way, and like, I don't know what my dad does. And to have someone just give this like requested like testimonial. And it wasn't so much about me, it was about the power of believing in people, the power of a lot of things that you and Josie are talking about, is like really listening to people, believing sort of in their higher potential, sometimes giving people hard feedback and honest feedback, encouraging them when they're down. And just, she's like, I had a list of what I wanted to accomplish. Looking back, I've killed it. Now I need a new list. I need to start over. So that's those experiences that we get to have, whether it's individual leaders, whether it's teams, whether it's organizations. It's really fun, because in the end, we get to have an impact on people, and how much impact is really our choice. So I love the choice that we both made.
It's fabulous. Well, and I think, your emphasis around being willing to have those hard conversations, really impactful conversations, it really takes a special person or a regular person on the right day being willing to have that, right? Let's be
brave
clear.
day.
Yes, a lot of people, it just takes a tremendous amount of courage. And so the fact that you've got a knack for that, you like to lead people through that process, you can model it, it's really, really significant from a transformational perspective. And that is what businesses need.
Absolutely.
All right. I feel like, we could just keep going. I really want you to get onto your margaritas. You're in a later time zone than I am, and I've got to go actually pick up my two little wild munchkins.
No worries.
Where, for people that are listening and going, oh my gosh, I need to connect with Josie and Ron, I want to find out more about their work, what they do, how they can help me. Where would you like for people to find you or connect with you?
You can find us at our website, which is www.avanthrs.com. Has all of our contact information there. We're both on LinkedIn, Ron Ross and Josie Ross. There aren't a lot of us with those names, so you can find us on LinkedIn. And those are probably the best places.
Best spots. Okay, we will share those links in the show notes. So if you're listening, go pop over to legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Look for Josie and Ron's episode. We will also, based on the timing of this, I suspect that your book will have very recently come out. We will share the link to your book as well. Inspire Me. Yeah. So be sure, if you're listening, to pop over and check that out. I can tell you already, it's going to be a wealth of resource for you in your business and team building journey, adventure, whatever you want to call it. What final thoughts would either one of you like to leave our listeners with today before we sign off? And you both can share something, by the way.
Yeah. You first, Josie.
Just people is hard. We all need support
Mm.
around it. We all get into tricky situations, and that's what we do. It's the work we love to do to help people sort of support them through their hardest conversations and their stickiest situations.
Yeah.
I love that.
I would say I think it kind of showed up in this conversation is if you're going to invest in any skill as an entrepreneur to really improve, it's communication. So it's not only just having like those hard conversations, but even having those transformational conversations that Heather you've talked about, where it's like we're just talking about ideas and we're all listening and we're fighting for the best idea. And that's a skill set. And don't be alarmed if you're not great at it, but it's something, if you invest in that, I do believe it has so much return. And I don't care
Mm.
what business you're in. I think that's where the juice is.
100%. I tell people all day long, like people are not racing towards, I just call it the dispute resolution bucket. It's a little bit the world you guys live in. And I say, you know, call it communication strategy so it feels better. But it is literally, if you learn the skills required to handle difficult conversations, it is money back in your pocket all day long. It's energy back into your life and your business building efforts. It's time savings. And ultimately, from a business building perspective, stronger teams, stronger culture, stronger everything. But it people tend to, I think, forget that prioritize the other things. And it's like, no, this is an investment that pays you back tenfold, hundredfold, right?
So
Yeah.
true.
It's huge.
So
Well,
true.
I appreciate you guys. This has been so much
Yes,
fun.
it
I
has been.
really look forward to connecting with you guys again. I'm super grateful that you came and spent your time here with me today.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Heather. What a
You did a great
pleasure.
job. I know you're just amazing. So thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you. We'll talk
All
to you
right.
soon.
Enjoy your Friday.
You too.
All right. We'll see you.
Hallelujah.
All right. We'll see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.